Hi, I'm Callum Jackson. I'm a alumni from the Leeds Beckett Graphic Arts and Design course. I graduated in the summer of 2018, and I'm going to talk to you a bit today about some of the work I produced throughout the course and my sort of journey and career so far after graduating. I'm going to share my screen. So I'm starting off with a little bit of a snapshot of some of the work I was producing in the second year of the course. To me, the second year of the course is such an important year because it's where you get to be experimental without the added pressure of the third year final submission, and you start to sort of figure out where you lie as a practitioner. And to me, sort of it became more evident as the year went on that typography was at the core of my practice, and I was working in this sort of analog off-screen sort of method at the time. And the reason I've included this slide will become more clear later on in the presentation. And then, as I said, typography was at the core of my practice. So going into third year, when I was introduced to ISTD, it definitely seemed that's something I'd be interested in. So for those of you who don't know what ISTD is, it stands for the International Society of Typographic Designers. It's not a venereal disease, as I have to sometimes explain to non-designer friends. But it's a prestigious society made for and run by typographers. So famous members include like the late Wim Crowell, Eric Speakman, Fraser Muggeridge, and so on. But every year, this society releases 5 briefs which students can undertake to gain membership. And I think the one that really stuck out to me was writing women into history. The brief asked for you to find a woman from history whose life and achievements weren't recognized, and then typographically represent that. But you can't just pick the first person you find off Google on a BuzzFeed article. It requires a bit of deep diving. And then after a while, I came across the book Rocket Girl, which is about Mary Shimmer Morgan, who was a female rocket scientist who was responsible for the creation of the liquid fuel Hydine, which powered the first Jupiter-C satellite to space. But it had sort of this great foundation to sort of work upon. She had this great, amazing layered story, and then on top of that, there was the visual language of, sort of science, chemistry, the space race, the 1950s aesthetic in America. So it was all, that was definitely a selling point to me, and I sort of became engrossed with that story, and it was all I sort of thought about for a while. And then the society has sort of a criteria it requires for you to get a pass to gain membership. One of the biggest chunks is research and development. So I began starting to look through like the NASA 1975 graphic standards manual, which was recently re-released by some partners at Pentagram. But the sort of hero color I used throughout my work was directly taken from the NASA red that they use in the standards manual. And then obviously with it being requiring typographic specifications and a grid system, I needed a little bit of a basis for that. And then I was introduced to Mark Farrow's album artwork for Spiritualized Ladies and Gentlemen, which I couldn't find the exact reference I used, but you can sort of see here that it's clearly like got this pharmaceutical science look to it. It was all produced under strict pharmaceutical regulations, and it's just sort of visually quite stunning and gives that impression of the visual language straight away. And then there's a lot of work involved in ISTD. If Joe hasn't already told you, it's almost relentless at some points. It's I was living off Tesco meal deals, and I was dreaming about it at some point because it was all I was doing every hour of the day. But we started to sort of print stuff off and pin stuff up on the wall. And I think the photo on the right was one Joe took of mine and Ellie's very messy desk. And you can sort of see that we just started to build up so much work. And as Joe would say, you've got to work through the shit to get to the good. And it's all about, you get into this good point and you start again. And there's a lot of people, I think there's about 15 people who started it when we undertook it. And then by sort of the midway point, there was only 5 of us standing. but it's important that you keep everything you do because you submit that to the society. And it's also a way where you can sort of see your progress throughout it and see how your stats are improving, your typesetting, and as well as like the design of the whole thing. And at times it can be a little bit sort of daunting, and there's points where all you want to do is hide, like Ellie is here in a suitcase in the studio a few days before the final submission. But then you get the final product, and um, I always remember the day I printed the final poster you can sort of see here, which also acted as a wraparound cover. So Dave coming up to me outside the print room, and I was thinking, oh God, I can't take it. Please don't point something out. And I know he sort of gave me the thumbs up, and that was all I need, the confidence boost I needed. And so my final sort of product for this was set into sort of three parts of the wraparound poster and cover. The sort of main booklet where you can sort of look at that reference to the Mark Farrow work I showed you earlier. And then there's also a letter which linked to, which is almost quite discreet in this photo here, but that links to a sort of story within Mary's life, which I had hidden in the folds, which also relates to the contents of the story being a bit hidden. And we can sort of see here how it's all interacted with each other, and it all sort of folded in. Every sort of detail was taken in, so there was no sort of horrible creases, and these tipped in pages worked with the sort of the layouts that and systems that I'd set in the actual booklet itself. But like I say, every detail is taken into account. So the main poster wraparound cover was printed on Fenner Shiro Echo paper and quite a light GSM to sort of give reference to those almost like rice paper inserts you get in like a pack of paracetamol. But the paper, despite being like a low GSM, held the ink, retained the ink very well, so that that sort of bold image, which was originally done on a risograph to sort of pay reference to methods of design at the time, the ink would it was retained and wouldn't bleed through and take away from the content on the other side of the poster, which was a bit of an introduction to Mary's life before the story got to her creating the fuel. But everything, like where the type sits in relation to the fold, was taken into account. And then, as well as that, it was also important to get this idea of a countdown within the book and a sort of visual start and end point. So the front cover of the book had a satellite image of the Earth, and the back cover had the moon. So as you went through the book, rather than having page numbers for a folio, I had an eclipse happening, which you can sort of see in the little crescent here in the bottom right corner. So the closer to the end of the book and Mary's death you got, the more it became an eclipse, and then ending on the back cover of the moon. So all tying it together, and then visual sort of references to the countdown were sort of brought in here as well. In the top left image was a sort of another tension which worked with my grid to create another device that worked with my grid to create a bit more tension to the reader and add to that sort of countdown. And then below the sort of molecular structure was a sort of device I used for when every time there's a conversation to sort of give it a bit more hierarchy and pop within the page. And then we submitted the work, which was we had several weeks of sort of waiting anticipation after the work was dropped off in Cardiff, I think it was. But then after checking our email every 5 minutes over those 2 weeks, the email came through to let us know that we passed. And it was just sort of a moment of sort of, for lack of a better phrase, bliss. And it still seems surreal to me to this day. It was, but all that hard work we put in sort of paid off. But even if we hadn't have passed, you still come out of it at the end of this amazing sort of project. And it's more, as well as that, it made me progress so much more as a designer. There's all these sort of systems and rules that I put into place in my own practice going ahead. And there's the biggest sort of learning curve throughout university for me. And I'd definitely highly recommend anyone to undertake it if you feel like typography is something that you have an interest in, or even if you don't, it's a good way to sort of learn it. And with Jo Hamill at the helm, she'll help you get to the best place you can possibly be. And as well as the sort of gaining lifetime membership to the society, you sort of get to represent this by having MISTD after your name, so a member of the International Society of Typographic Designers, which sort of helps you when you go off for jobs in the future, because then you have people who know it sort of think, oh, they know their shit, and it's sort of an added thing to go with your degree. So it makes you stand out from the crowd, because at times it can be a bit of a crowded market. And it's all to sort of tie the whole thing together. You have this sort of awards or accreditation evening in Pentagram's Notting Hill office. And this was sort of a nice time for, I think, for Joe and Justin to sort of celebrate with us, as it was them who sort of helped push us through and kept the memento going, and we couldn't have done it without them for sure. And sort of side note on this, I thought I should mention Barry Tullett, who was a guest lecturer in my third year and was one of my favorite guest lecturers of all time. I think one of his work for Dante's Inferno is one of sort of my favorite projects visually I've ever seen. And he's loved typewriters, which is also something I collect myself, although not as avidly as him. But I'd sort of found out that he was the person who wrote the brief I undertook for ISTD. So for part of my critical study, I sort of arranged to meet him, to interview him at the University of Lincoln, where he lectures and also runs the Case Room Press with Philip Ward. And he sort of gave me a tour and showed me his extensive lecture set and letterpress collections, as well as typewriters, but also lots of little helpful hints and tips on how to crack the brief and ultimately gain membership to the society. And so the work I'd sort of done through ISTD sort of led on to the next project, which is my final major project, which is Through the Looking Glass. So throughout university, I worked at an optician's on Leedsborough a bit called Ollie Quinn, where everybody had a sort of great space where we could display work. And I decided to team up with Ellie, who'd also passed ISTD with me, and we made us have we bonded a great friendship from it. And we sort of thought we should play with the nature of the exhibition being set in an optician. So he led us to Through the Looking Glass, which is the sequel to Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. And so we're trying to think, like, what do we sort of show from the books? It's probably 180 pages or so. How do we redact that to make it sort of work for an exhibition? So we came to the idea of it, well, we wanted it to be purely typographic, which sort of came from a conversation I had with Aidan about the Beatrice Ward essay called The Crystal Goblet, where she describes typography as being the crystal goblet, which conveys displays the wine and should be used as a device to display rather than sort of taking away from it and being the main feature itself. So the whole idea of the exhibition was sort of a juxtaposition on this, of an opposite of her idea of type being the sort of supporting act. So we picked these sort of 12 poems from the novel, from the book, and we sort of started to think about how can we make the exhibition so that it sort of works in the way the audience interact with it and the way they sort of navigate through. So the first piece, as you sort of go through the store doors, was the first poem, which was Vinyl Set in the Mirror, which is when Alice is going through the looking glass. So this sort of represents the viewer going through the looking glass themselves as they're going through. And then we sort of thought it was important to play the idea of it being in opticians. So we created a piece based on one of the 12 poem in the novel, or 11 to 12 poem in the novel, which the first letter of each line spelled out Alice Pleasance Liddell, which is who Lewis Carroll based Alice off. But we sort of typeset this so it was reminiscent of a Snellen chart, which is an optometrist chart, sort of backlit on a display box a light box borrowed from the university. But this almost did too good of a job in a sense, because people actually thought it was part of the opticians rather than a piece for the exhibition, which I'm sort of had mixed feelings about, but they were overall happy. And then even though I said there was 12 poems. We found through our research there was a 13th unpublished poem, but we couldn't find that, not through lack of trying. So, but we still wanted to represent this throughout the exhibition. So we created a photogram mashup of all the work and from all the experimental work that from the poems we produced the exhibition, and blew this up and had this in an alcove, which was sort of hidden away from where you'd walk naturally through the exhibition. So it was almost like it's sort of playing the idea of it being unpublished and hidden itself. And I think that was my favorite sort of piece visually from the exhibition. And we sort of, the whole exhibition was mainly set in Garamond, which was sort of chosen for the sort of English heritage, and sort of being brought out not too far off the time Lewis Carroll brought out Through the Looking Glass. But before, how do we keep it from being sort of dry and bland if it's just a purely typographic poem exhibition? And we sort of had these sort of highlights of the ligatures and these sort of beautiful ampersand that and glyphs that Garamond has, and use them in quite an illustrative way, but sort of also being true to the nature of their the sort of content of the poem. And then we also tried to sort of play in the idea of it being a bit of a Mad Hatter's tea party, and we served gin and tonic out sort of teacups and saucers with little vials which contain the gin, saying "Drink me," so we're almost paying sort of homage to that. And we also had these sort of pieces which were laser cut on perspex, which was sort of hidden inside these upside down plants that were already in the store, which I thought sort of worked perfectly with the idea of this sort of warped reflected reality. And then there's a sort of theme of chess throughout the book, which we wanted to play on a little bit more. So to signify the end, we created an anamorphic mural which said checkmate at the end of a game of chess. But we chose anamorphic to sort of play with that sort of distorted view in reality. So when you look at it dead on, it sort of reads correctly, but then from different angles, it's warped and plays with ideas of sort of perception. And it's to give you a bit of behind the scenes in this, it was fairly simple to do, just fairly time consuming. So it's to put it simply, it's just projecting onto a wall, masking that out and painting it. And well, I ended up having to paint it twice because the paint job underneath was a bit shitty. But to document all this, we wanted to create almost like a keepsake for mine and Ellie's portfolio, and also it's something we could treasure forever to sort of help us remember the exhibition. So we documented all our sort of research and development in a sort of similar way to how we've done for ISCD, and put in sort of this book form that stayed true to the proportion ratio of the Carroll's sort of first edition of the novel, and sort of documented all that in sort of this book with it sort of, sorry, I'm mixing that. But yeah, I don't think I'd ever sworn as much in one day as trying to sort of stitch the binding the booklets together, but much to Ella's amusement. And then for the degree show, we created a bit of a sort of final sort of mashup of some of the work we produced that sort of captures the essence of the exhibition, as well as the Snellen chart from before that it's returned to the university. But again, sort of you can see this sort of that beautiful ampersand coming back in, and the ligatures and glyphs. It's it's a shame we couldn't keep that one. I don't know if it's still up in the studio now, but doubt it. Yeah, and Ellie and I formed, as I've said earlier, a great sort of friendship throughout this, and I think our plan is going to sort of go off in our own career for a bit, and hopefully we'd love to work together again. I think we have a great working dynamic, even though at one point she did say she wanted to throw me down the stairs. But it was, I think we were all very happy with the work we produced, the exhibition. And then sort of came the sad point when I had to say goodbye to my messy university desk. And then it was a bit of a, oh shit, what's next? And I think I'd spent so much time throughout university not sort of planning for what was going to happen after. It was more thinking about the work, and I hadn't got a plan in place but I was fortunate enough to be introduced by the university to Graham Sturt just after the degree show. So Graham was the then creative director at VBAT, based in Amsterdam, and he sort of gave me his card and said, "I have an internship going in about 4 or 5 months, and so if you can wait till then, keep in touch." So I think I'd sort of kept in touch with Graham, but I was still sort of applying for other things, but everything I was applying for, and even some offers I had, never seemed as good as Amsterdam. Amsterdam was always stuck in my mind, and still it seemed quite surreal. It was the sort of thing I never thought was going to end up happening, but then it did. In January 2019, I made the move to Amsterdam. I'd never been to Amsterdam before moving over there, but I thought that sold me to it even more. I think it was because everything was sort of completely new to me, and it was starting from scratch. But I couldn't imagine myself not liking it there. And so I started as an intern at VBAP. When you start as an intern, it's not all the exciting jobs for the big clients straight away. You start off small, so I spent a lot of time at the beginning in the print room, sort of cropping prints and mounting foam boards for people. But this is your sort of opportunity to sort of show yourself, see what people are doing, and then from that you can sort of say, "Oh, you've been working on such and such account. Is there anything I can do to help?" It sort of helps you get your sort of foot in the door. But the VBAT, should have said, is owned by WPP, which is one of the largest media companies in the world. And sort of behind an image there is their sort of the WPP campus Amstel Dock, which sort of stands out architecturally from these stereotypical Dutch townhouses that surround it. And VBAT, as I was joining, we're working on this sort of a unique identity for the building that sort of played with the architecture and sort of the sort of Dutch flavour. And I'll show you a little snippet of it here, but I'm sure Graham, who I believe is speaking tomorrow, will do a better job at selling it than I can. You can sort of see from that video how it sort of ties to both the architecture of the building, these sort of extruding and protruding parts, and its uniqueness, but also a bit of Dutch flavour thrown in, taken from, I think it was the photos were taken by me, sort of cycling around Amsterdam, finding some of the references for that. But it was the typeface, which is sort of the hero of it all, was created in collaboration with the Type Foundry fontsmith. But it was a variable font that could easily be adapted, so we could make lots of different unique combinations for headlines with this. And one of my first jobs was to create a set of fly posters for the grand opening of the office, the campus. Just sort of show you a quick selection of here. As you start to get to see how that typeface can be easily reworked and just to make everything a little bit different. And then from this, I was given the task to promote Compliments Day around the office, which Compliments Day is meant to be the most positive day of the year, although I can't say it's a holiday I've ever heard of before. But nevertheless, I sort of wanted to get involved in it. It's my chance to sort of get some of my work shown around the office, and I'd already done these posts, and I was thinking, how can I make this a little bit different? And sort of start to think about what's the nature of a compliment. You sort of pass on a compliment to someone. So then I started to sort of think about these posters you see on sort of lamp posts, which have the sort of tearaway phone number for a babysitter, a dog walker. So we created these compliments that you could tear away from the poster to pass on to one of your colleagues. As well as this, Georgia Williams and I, who is also a graduate from Leeds Beckett and interning at VBAT, spent most of an evening and early hours of the morning, making hundreds of fortune cookies. So we could leave one with a compliment rather than a fortune on everyone's desk when they came in with their morning coffee. And then after about 3-4 months of working at VBAC, things started to get really interesting for me. I was given the opportunity to work on a project called Made in Amsterdam, Ideas That Travel. So this was in a collaboration with a photographer called Peter Sablis, who approached us to create the book. The idea was that it'd have sort of 50 or so entrepreneurs from Amsterdam and sort of their creative ideas that have now made them international successes. And it's all about the counterculture in Amsterdam, its rebellious streak, and sort of how this Amsterdam is this amazing sort of cultural hub and melting pot of cultures. So when we were sort of trying to think of how we can sort of create sort of a visual cue for this, we went to also started to think about Paul Messenger's wayfinding design for Schiphol Airport, which has these sort of great sort of things to work from. You had the icons, that sort of bold yellow, and then we started to think about a sort of system we could put in place, because we knew there's going to be a lot of content to come, and it's how do we make this in a way that's relatively quick to input, but we keep it and feels consistent, but also has creative flares and breakout moments throughout. I'll show you a little video here that gives you an example of this. So we've created a system where each entrepreneur would be given 2 spreads. The opening spread, we gave art direction on creating these sort of quirky portraits of the main person behind the business or idea. And then you sort of see in the right page that how we sort of use those icons from the wayfinding design to create almost illustrative pieces. So here it creates these sort of 3 crosses from Amsterdam. And then we'd also include the longitude and latitude of where the business came to life in Amsterdam. And sort of one of the sort of tips I'd learned from IOCD was I think an interesting way of sort of showing folios. So in the bottom right, you can sort of see very smallly, we have a little plane icon that would move closer to the right side of the page, the further to the end of the book you're going, so you can sort of be flick through. It's almost like a flip book. And you see the journey of the plane closer to the end. And then we sort of created a few different systems for the second spread, which would have sort of the product that was made the business well known, and then if an interview, and then as well as that, we had this thing which we called our sort of Amsterdam rebellious streak in the gutter there, in this sort of yellow line, where we'd have sort of a cultural and sort of quirky fact linking to the business in Amsterdam. But here's a little bit of selection of some of the spreads, and we sort of had we created a different system for every I think it was 50 or so pages, we'd include a section on a counterculture within Amsterdam, which would be printed different paper stock, which was a sort of bold yellow, which stood out with a black and white image we'd used, and then was to different dimensions, so you can sort of tell you're at a different visual, just by feeling you can tell you're at a different section within the book, I should say. We had a sort of a little bit of a battle with Peter Sablis, the photographer, on the actual print production itself. He was funding most of it and very mindful of that, but we sort of were trying to convince him that paying this extra is all worth it. So we sort of, the cover is this gorgeous sort of debossing that's sort of so subtle compared to the sort of flat LIFO cover. I can't remember what it was exactly he wanted, but sort of I think works so subtly and nicely with it. And then the inside pages, we created the illustrative map of Amsterdam that would have sort of yellow dots relating to those longitude and latitude coordinates I sort of talked about before. And here's a bit of an overview of the whole book. But you can sort of start to see here how even though it's a sort of system we have in place, we find a way to make all the content feel creative and different and sort of linked to the idea of the entrepreneur we'd be displaying. Well, then came a bit of a oh fuck moment. My internship at VBAT was coming to an end, and unfortunately, they weren't able to keep me on. And I sort of had a few weeks left in Amsterdam, where I was sort of panicking, thinking, "Oh, my time here doesn't feel like it's up. I need to find something." But it wasn't the time to sort of drown my sorrows, and which led me to TBWA in Avoco. So at the time when I was interning at at VBAT, I was living at Hotel Janssen on the sort of the building on the left here. So I was sort of looking out at the TBWA office almost every day, and I was sort of familiar with some of their work from an essay I did in my degree. And sort of, I think I do remember at one point putting them as like a dream company to work for. And then through a bit of stalking, I managed to track down the design director's email address and sort of sent him an email sort of letting him know how I'd love to work for them, and I'd love to have a chat. And it was all a very sort of quick process. I think I emailed them Monday. By the Wednesday, I was having an interview, and by Friday, I'd signed the contract, which is perfect. I knew then I wasn't going to be leaving Amsterdam. The sort of reason I sort of showed some of my second year work before was because when I interviewed with the design director, I sort of showed him this sort of quite polished portfolio of sort of everything was very final and sort of well photographed. And we somehow ended up going onto my Instagram, and he was sort of scrolling through and saw some of my earlier quite experimental work. And he said, "Oh, that's what we're looking for. Can you put together a side portfolio and send that to me?" And then that's what ultimately helped me get the job. I mean, it's all sort of big package, but that was the sort of icing on the cake. I think from what I've spoken to him afterwards about this. I said a little bit about TBWA. I should know how to say it, it's my company. TBWA in Avoco. It's one of the largest advertising agencies in the Netherlands in terms of sort of revenue and clients. So our main clients are Adidas, Gatorade, McDonald's, Albert Heijn, which is the biggest chain of supermarkets in the Netherlands, and some smaller sort of the state lottery and some smaller sort of betting companies. The company is sort of split into two. TBWA is the international side, which I work on, which I was chosen for my native English tongue, and then the Avoco side, it was what was bought by TBWA, which is a sort of global network. Avoco was the original advertising agency, so it's almost like a merger. But there's two, even though we work separately in clients, I still live it in the Dutch side, and Dutch people tend to sort of do a bit on the international side every now and then. But it's not, it sounds separate, but we're all part of the same family. So my first sort of project when I started working for TBWA and Avoco was for the Adidas Ultra Boost 20 campaign, which is the first shoe that's been sent into space. So it was in a collaboration with the ISS, International Space Station. But it's a performance running trainer, so we sort of created the idea that the boost, which is the sort of sole of the shoe, which this sort of very material gives you so much boost that you're saying goodbye to gravity. And you can sort of use various sort of like textural approach using sort of pay sort of reference to satellite spacecraft backgrounds and all the sort of visual images that sort of give impression with its, I think since that sort of space age. And so really, I should say with advertising, you're almost a bit like a cog in the machine. Like there's a lot of people, it's such large scale campaigns. Everyone's sort of working together. You don't sometimes feel like you have full ownership over anything, but it'd be near enough impossible to do the amount of work to yourself. So you're on a project, you'll have creative directors, art directors, brand directors, account managers, designers, and strategists, and so on. It's we're all all work together. But my sort of main role in this project was to create the typeface for it. So it was my first sort of functional typeface I've ever made, and it was sort of took reference to Adidas has their sort of house type they'd already made, but we thought, how can we make this sort of feel a bit more in fitting with the whole theme of it all? So I sort of found these references of um, aircraft hangars, which had these sort of stencil markings in the floor, which sort of a combination between that and the Addy House font became the basis of this. I mean, it's by no means perfect, but I think it was a good starting point for me to sort of produce a font that's been end up going out around the world, and we sort of created these sort of textures to sort of add to that. There's sort of goodbye gravity there. Almost gives the impression it's sort of taking off. And then, so once the campaign goes out, you start to sort of see how different markets have taken your work and adapted it. And I think some of the retail installations agencies used our sort of visual language for were sort of amazing with what they did in such a sort of, it's quite a very quick turnaround of all this. And yeah, but you do find some markets do an amazing job like this, and other markets, from when I've had a quick scroll through Instagram to see what's out there, and destroy the whole thing. And I sort of play a bit of a snippet of the hero film.
Look up. Space is a story to tell. Space is where impossible problems have to be solved just to get off the ground. Where tiny innovations change whole industries here on Earth. Space proves that believing in something can turn dreams into reality. We believe a running shoe can defy gravity. And we're testing boosts in space. Keep on pushing. Ultra Boost 20.
Great. Which sort of leads me on to, at the time I was working on, as well as that, the Predator campaign, which Predator's sort of a branch within Adidas football, where it's a almost fierce looking football boot, which has these spikes, which we dubbed demon skin on. But the idea we created around this campaign was that it gives you the spikes are meant to give more spin in the ball, but it makes it 100% unfair for everyone else in the game because of this sort of fierce, almost like demon-esque look to the product. We wanted to sort of capture that in the sort of visual language of the campaign, and we had Paul Pogba, who is the sort of key hero asset for the campaign, and we sort of created this. We wanted to call it almost mutating the demon skin from when he puts on the product, and just sort of illustrated that on him, and then also working that idea into the typography we designed for it. So one of my main roles in this was to produce the toolkit, which was, like I said, it's almost like a set of brand guidelines which we send to markets. So when they need to adapt to their needs, they can do so. But we have to think about everything about how it works in print, digital. Maybe it's going to be sort of a special piece made for a Metro newspaper. How did they do that? How does the typography change? If it needs to have an umlaut or needs to be turned into Cyrillic. It's everything like that is sort of taken into account, and it's something we do for every campaign, and it's one of the biggest parts of it. And as well as that, my sort of claim to fame with this campaign was that I was Paul Pogba's foot double. So the original agency who took the photos of Pogba didn't do the best job of keeping the product in focus. So we ended up having to retouch it, and I was sample size, so I had to get carried up a ladder because I couldn't put the spikes underneath on the floor. So if you ever see this campaign around, it's not Pogba's foot, it's mine. And I think because I'd sort of started to prove myself in the last two projects, I was given the opportunity to be lead designer on one of the campaigns that was coming out, which is called Share Your Stripes, which is a promotional campaign which comes out on the 75th anniversary of Adidas's founding. But the idea is like, it's a promotional thing where you buy two, you get one free. So rather than sort of do that all for yourself. You team up with someone, you start to share your stripes. The identity we started to create for this was all around so this moment to connect with people, like then teaming up. It was hugging or fist bumps or high fives, all captured in this. And then the sort of design was sort of taken to be a bit over the top. Like you get these sort of coupons, which have too much things going on, but it's almost, that was the whole visual behind it. And as well as that, it was, we wanted to sort of get this free stripes in it, but in the sort of Adidas guidelines, you're not allowed to use illustrations of free stripes. So I sort of took a hoodie from the office and scanned that in and used that as a sort of textural background. But then 2020 started to catch up with us, and obviously a campaign that revolves around people's hugging and fist bumps didn't seem, excuse me, quite appropriate for the times. And the office turned a bit into a ghost town, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And to turn my spare room into a home office and get my fix my dog by FaceTiming him instead of flying back. And then came Microsoft Teams, which I think we're finally getting used to now, and people are always on mute when they're trying to speaking or vice versa. It's usually, it was a lot of this at the beginning, and there's been a few meetings that have been a bit like that. Jackie Weaver, Handful Parish Council meeting. The campaign did eventually go out, albeit sort of a bit of a smaller release in Southeast Asia. But unfortunately, due to Adidas's lack of business at the time, the budgets were cut and we sort of had to stick where we were at, which is a bit disappointing as there was a lot more room for creative development within this. But I think it still creates up a nice, bold, eye-catching visual. We did, as you can sort of see, there is almost the impression that there's a moment of connect, but we didn't show the actual having the fist bump itself. And I don't know about Chinese typesetting, but I hope they did a good job. And then, so after that, I started to work on the follow-up to Ultra Boost 20, Ultra Boost 21, which is our sort of first campaign we made almost solely working from home. When we were sort of approached to start working on this, Adidas has started to change their sort of brand expression, their look and feel, and rather having this sort of textural approach and sort of lots of layers and sort of almost giving the impression it's handmade. It's the sort of new way forward now is this sort of quite clean and premium cinema 4D render style, which is directly quote, make it more like Nike, is what they say. But the whole theme around this campaign was called like high energy. So when you put on the product, it gives you helps you get the runner's high. And then I think you may have seen this in the last Ultra Boost campaign I just showed, where it's one of their hero assets that they bought into a while ago, which they love, is called the check boost, which is sort of showing the moment, sort of an energy trail, sort of an explosion, which is called the touch and go, and then energy return on the right side. But to me, it's something I've never really been too much a fan of. It's too much, but I think Adidas and big clients tend to sort of want things to be quite sort of immediate, and this is a concept they love, and for every Ultra Boost campaign we do now, they want that to be a key part of it. To give you a little bit of a snapshot of some of these sort of the range of stuff we produced, we wanted everyone to have this sort of either is studio photography to link with that check boost and have that sort of rendered almost backdrop. And then we created these photography treatments, which are called high energy expression, which almost gives like a, like on the portrait here, you can see it's almost sort of psychedelic. So that sort of feeling of the energy escaping from him after a run. And then on the product, a little bit more subtle, where it's the glow of the energy escaping from the shoe. Some of these are mock-ups as the campaign's only just sort of starting to come out, but I'm looking forward to see what markets around the world do with it. And so I'm not purely on Adidas all the time. I've been doing quite a bit of work on Gatorade, but unfortunately that's not out just yet. So I'm not just to expensive secrecy clause in my contract. I'm not allowed to share anything. And I also do a bit of work for the vegetarian butcher, which is originates from the Netherlands and has this sort of gorgeous sort of Art Nouveau sort of style. So it's a nice one to work up from, and the product itself is actually very good. But it's all this idea of you not sacrificing anything by having their product, and it's a great sort of campaign to work on. And unfortunately, same again, I can't unfortunately share that, but as well, to give you a little bit of a taste of what it's like to work in an advertising agency, it's definitely a work hard, play hard mentality. We have sort of company ski trips once a year, or when they're allowed. And if you don't go on the ski trip, they have an après ski party held in the office. We have lots of very cute office dogs wandering around. And so below you can see we have the company used to spend a lot of money sending people to the Cannes Lions Award, and they sort of thought it's rather than pay to send these 4 people, let's spend the money on having a big Cannes office summer party. As below you can see the chief creative officer convincing a designer to do a backflip off the bridge outside the office. And they love a little bit of fancy dress, and there's always a great theme for the Christmas party. Yeah. And then I thought it'd be important to give a bit about what it's like to live in the Netherlands. So for those who don't know, this is bitterballen, which is a traditional Dutch bar snack, although it's eaten anytime, any place by Dutch people. And I'm not probably sure what's in them, but they are quite delicious. But I ate so much my first 6 months of living here, I'm scarred for life for them. But they're the sort of height of Dutch cuisine. The Dutch aren't really known for their food, and I can sort of agree on that. What Amsterdam is like, it's the amazing sort of cultural melting pot, and there's just, as well as having a great art and design background, there's always just something going on in the city. Considering I'd consider it to be quite a small city. Everything's got its own sort of quirkiness, and yeah, there's like there, and the top of the picture is Sexyland, which in true Dutch fashion was a sex store, and then it was converted into a club, but it's a different club every day of the year. So one day it could be an art competition or slam poetry night, and then it could be an actual club night itself. And every time I go to visit, it's painted completely different. And then you have sort of I Harlem, the sort of biggest flea market in Europe, and it's a great place to pick up old typewriters, as well as the sort of galleries. Like Stedelijk is one of my favorite galleries of all time. And you have the iconic sort of Barbara Kruger staircase in there. And there's lots of little letterpress studios, workshops around Amsterdam, which I was fortunate to get the chance to do while I was at VBAT. And the best way to see Amsterdam is through a boat around the canals. The minute it starts to get warm, it's the best way, and one of my favorite things to do in Amsterdam. I was fortunate enough to be visited by Ellie over there, my studio wife, and some of these pictures, I should say that all this is taken pre-corona, but it has the amazing sort of King's Day and Amsterdam Pride, where the canals are just filled with people. There's a great atmosphere, and as well as that, you're 20 minutes away from the beach in Amsterdam. And if you're ever in Amsterdam, I'd highly recommend going to Supper Club, which sort of contradicts a bit of what I said about the food earlier. Supper Club is a sort of unique dining experience. We eat on beds, and you have the surprise, it's either 5 or 7 course meal, while they have very sort of Amsterdam acts going on. It's amazing. Even if you're ever in Amsterdam after all this, I'd highly recommend it. And then Joe sent me over some questions from the students, which I'm going to try and answer the best I can. So, was the country city a big factor in deciding who you wanted to work with? If so, what do you like about it? I'd probably say the moving to a different country or a different city was a bigger factor to me than the actual company itself, or wherever I wanted to work, because to me it was whatever key city around the world is I would want it to go to, there's always going to be someone there where I could probably find somewhere that's going to be suited for me after a bit of searching. Maybe some places have it more than others, but to me, as design is about what you take in, and it's your sort of personal toolkit, and experiencing a new city, new cultures and experiences. It's sort of all feeding to that, and the more you feed in, the more you can produce out. So I think trying something completely new is more important to me personally. And then when you're in a different country, you can start to find other places that maybe you think are more suited to you. I suppose this question leads on to this. Would you advise working abroad? What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of this? Well, start off 100%. I would advise working abroad. It was the best decision I ever made. I'm still very thankful to the course for introducing me to Graham and starting this whole thing off. I think I probably talked a bit about the advantages a bit before. It's all these, to not sound too cheesy, but you meet amazing new people. I'm hoping to sort of have trips around Europe to visit friends once this is all over, and you sort of get an insight into a different culture and sort of see how that sort of differentiates from your own. It's one of my favorite things is always to go around a supermarket in a different country and just see how all the packaging and everything like that is completely different elsewhere. Especially when you go somewhere, I mean, in Amsterdam, it's not the most dissimilar, but if you go to America, is probably one of the favorites to sort of see the difference there and how they go. Even I didn't think you could go even more over the top in a supermarket than an American one. But yeah, so mainly I'd say the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, but the disadvantages, I'd say you are sort of starting over, which can also be a bit of an advantage as well. And like I came over here with 2 suitcases, and I'm showing the point if I ever had to leave, or how much stuff I've accumulated over the time. But the starting over is quite a nice thing in a sense. You still have my friends back home, and my family home where I can always go back to. But it's nice to sort of that it's not completely starting over, and sort of going on from that, it's I'd say homesickness is a little bit of a thing, but to me it's no different from when I was at university. When I was at university, it was an hour train journey from Leeds to Manchester. The plane journey from Amsterdam to Manchester is also only an hour, although there's a bit more sort of protocol, but it's not far. It's only a stone's throw away. It doesn't feel like it's an ordeal getting back, although a little bit different again at the moment. Yeah, but I'd highly recommend moving abroad, and I know at the minute things are a little bit more difficult after Brexit, but I've been speaking to people who've recently been trying to get their sort of visa and application for Amsterdam, and it's just a little bit longer, but it's not impossible. And I'd highly recommend it. Even if you go and hate it after 6 months, you can always say you've done it. Do you believe design as a whole has the opportunity to become a sustainable practice? I think this one's a bit of a sort of layered answer, in the sense that there's a chain of things that sort of need to happen. Like I'm speaking here on a Mac, which I imagine most designers have, which probably has a lot of unsustainable, unrecyclable parts. So and as well as that, so when we work, if we continue to work on these, maybe we need to open up a conversation, sort of say, how do we make things become more sustainable? But I think that's more on big businesses like that to sort out. And then, but as designers, we tend to be quite liberal and wanting to do things more sustainably. So I think people are even will pay more to use sustainable, and it's sort of something you can also say afterwards. And you sort of, I think consumers now are looking for sustainability. Sorry, I'm going a little bit off track here, but I think it's going to be a long time, because when I think of things like print production, there is a lot of print methods that mean paper and books and things like that aren't recyclable. And on going off on books as well, I could never, if I was buying a design book, I would never buy it on Kindle. I always want the actual sort of physical thing in my hands. And I don't think that's something I'll ever change. But hopefully throughout time, methods will become more sustainable. And I think there's a demand for it at the moment. Well, hopefully things will change, but I think we're still a long way off. How often are you updating your portfolio? Not as often as I should be. I'm in the process at the minute of trying to update my website, which I think I'd put off for so long. It's now I've made things worse for myself. And I think the best thing you can do is keep on top of it. And if you sort of have the sort of foundations there, when you start to have or finish a big project or something that you feel could be in your portfolio, you can just keep adding to that. And it's good to have it ready because you never know when the next opportunity might arise and how quick you need to get portfolio turned around. And they are something that take a lot longer than you think. And even when you think you've done it, I'm always nitpicking at it. And I think it gets to a point where I just have to say, okay, this is the best it's going to be for now. I'd spend forever redoing my portfolio over and over again. So to summarize that, have a core one done and then just keep adding to it every time you do a big project. I see it as almost like a closing off point, although I'm not practicing what I preach. How do you determine the worth of your skill sets? I found this one quite a difficult one to answer because I don't really know the answer to this myself. I think most importantly, it shouldn't undervalue yourself. Or I don't really believe in working for free or for exposure unless there's certain instances, but on a whole, it's bullshit really. And you've got to remember you have a 30,000-40,000 plus education, and if people doing freelance work for other job industries, they'd be charging for that. So I think you have to sort of try and compare yourself sometimes to with industries, but we are also different in things. It's not like a design is never a straightforward answer. You never know how many sort of revisions and things like that are going to be in place. But I think, so when I was at university, when I was doing freelance work, I would also always sort of charge at least double or triple what I was earning in my part-time job at the time. And just sort of trying to factor in education costs and equipment costs for working expensive equipment as well. There's a lot of startup costs in being a designer. It's not the cheapest thing ever, and you've got to also keep on top of all that. But I think I've always found when you ask for more, you usually pleasantly surprised. So, and I think speaking personally, I think in my head I always tend to undervalue myself. I feel like I'm going to be cheeky if I ask for something, and then I usually sort of pluck up the courage and make a cheeky offer. And I think I've always been accepted on that. So always ask for more. Sorry, that's not the best answer to the question, but I hope it helps. I would love to hear about the struggles of the industry, some horror stories about clients, financial strains, recurring frustrations, and industry fears. Some juicy gossip about their industry competitors, the real nitty-gritty stuff, no sugarcoating. So I think I touched a bit before about how Adidas is quite a very demanding client. Same with Gatorade, they don't see the constraints of office hours and weekends, which is something that become used to, and we have things in place to try and make sure we're not going to have a burnout, which the Dutch are quite good for because they value their work-life balance. Although being an international bit, it's a bit different. But that's one thing. And then Adidas in the first sort of wave, first lockdown, they put all our work on hold. So normally we bill millions of pounds to them. I don't know the exact amount, but it's a ridiculous amount of money. But because they weren't paying rent in their stores and they had a bit of a loss of income themselves. It was a sort of knockdown effect onto us and obviously a lot of other industries as well. But they were sort of 20% of our business, and the profit margin of most advertising agencies is about 20%. So I won't go too boring on the figures here. It's about 20%, and which meant that so we were just about breaking even, or it's probably at some points a slight loss. But Dutch law dictates that when you start to lose money, or you have a loss of revenue, or you're not breaking even, you stop renewing temporary contracts. But most people in the agency are on temporary contracts. So people, regardless of how good they were or how long they've worked with the company, were just out of a job for no fault of their own, basically. And I was very fortunate that I signed my contract in February. If I was a month later, I would have been out of a job too. So with industry competitors, I'd say in terms of advertising agents in the Netherlands, there's not really, I'd say it's probably the opposite of competitors. It's almost like there's a bit of a rapport between them. So like a Wyden and Kennedy and 7220 throughout the whole pandemic, our CEO has been exchanging notes, seeing what works for them. It's almost like when you have restaurants together in a village, it's healthy competition. We're not fighting. We have different clients, and I sort of set clients that it's more if it comes to pitch time and one of our clients is leaving us, then it becomes more competition. And sort of on from that, a bit more of a juicier one was I was involved in a pitch for Destination Iceland, so the tourism for Iceland, the whole country, which is, to me, would have been a dream client. When we were working on the pitch, the designs we were creating, the imagery itself just sold it, and the design was almost secondary to the photography of Iceland. But because it's a government board, it works like a point system. So we came second with 89 points, and Saatchi came first with 91 points. So we're only just beating us. But after they awarded it, there's a bit of a grace period where they can change their mind, which is when sort of the dirty tactic comes in. So we sort of contacted Iceland and said, "Oh, do you know Saatchi is under financial investigation and tax fraud and all things like that," to try and change their mind. It ultimately didn't work, but it felt a bit house of cards at the time. How do you find inspiration for ideas when faced with a new brief? First off, I try and avoid Pinterest as much as possible. I think you just end up in a Pinterest loop and things start to look the same and you start making a very Pinterest design. I think it's not a very good place for reference. You don't get much context to things. If you're wanting a sort of quick visual reference for that, I would recommend this site. It's called Save It, but it's save with two e's.it. That I find to have sort of much cooler, sort of more up-to-date references that feel a bit more diverse than Pinterest. And also, my ideal way would be through books and publications, magazines, related to design. But unfortunately, as about libraries and things like that at the minute, I'm sort of without that. But I've sort of discovered the saved function on Instagram. So I've been building up the designers and studios who I aspire to, and sort of building them up. So I'm always seeing them on my news feed, and then sort of saving them and sort of creating sort of my own sort of Pinterest boards within that. And I find that very useful, more sort of like personal way to find the work I like and inspiration. How long did it take you to find work, and how did you go about doing it? Well, I was in the fortunate position of sort of meeting Graham at university and only having that sort of 6-month gap and then sort of one job to the other. But I think with my current job, like I said earlier, I tracked down design director's email address off LinkedIn. So that's a useful tool for that. And LinkedIn does occasionally, when I'm looking, has some quite interesting jobs going. I would avoid Indeed when I was searching in between starting VBAT and after finishing university. I sort of went for a few interviews in there, but they were sort of they tend to be in-house with somewhere that doesn't really know the value of a designer and just wants someone to make things look a bit prettier for them. And it's not the ideal career path. I mean, people do find it on it, but I think it's not the best place. I'd say going directly is best. Doing a bit of a stalk, finding who you like, and directly contacting, and it always makes it a bit more personal. And I think it help if you are actually having a job opening, it helps you stand out a bit more. What was the most important thing to consider when looking for an internship? For the internships, I'd say aim big when looking for an internship. Aim for what's your sort of dream company that you aspire to work for? Because you remember, as an internship, you're paid. So a lot of places, especially in the UK, it's little to nothing. VBAT was I was in the fortunate position of VBAT where they did sort of pay me something, and it made it sort of possible for me to do. Otherwise, my whole journey over here may have not happened, or it would have been a little bit more difficult. With the aim big, aim for somewhere you aspire to, because they're not paying that much, so they're taking less of a risk of you, and you can sort of, it's your chance to get your foot in the door, but also it's a chance where you can sort of try things out, and if something doesn't work, it's only a few months, and then you can sort of move on to something else. It's still the beginning of your career. It's the time to make mistakes and move on from that and learn from that. What was the most important step before employment? Was it qualifications at uni, or internship, or just experiences? So I'm going to give it a little bit of a sort of Swiss answer here. It's a bit of a connection between all three. Obviously, when you graduate from university with a first class degree, that's sort of a badge of honor you get to wear for the rest of your life, and it's something you'll always have bragging rights about. But being designers, it's a small part of our CV, and the portfolio is the big thing. People look more at the portfolio than the grades. So I think having a strong portfolio is better than having a good mark. As long as you've got the portfolio, that's the main sort of thing that's going to help you get a job. Internships as well. They're sort of, like I said, it's your chance to sort of try things out, and you don't have this sort of pressure of sort of I'd say full employment. When I was in internship, I still did feel like I was a full employee, and then sort of with experiences that they all sort of bleed into each other, and you never know where your sort of next job is going to come from. So when I was working when I was at college, I was working at a cafe, and I got chatting to the director of a small agency there, who, because I'd sort of explained I was a designer, she sort of looked at my portfolio and gave me a bit of a chance, and we still speak now. She still sends through freelance work, so that's sort of a little bit different, I know, from the experience you're talking about, but experiences like that can sort of help you get employment. I will answer that okay for you. How did the pandemic affect your workflow and process? Did it create some revelations in your practice? I think, first off, I'd say I feel like I'm more productive throughout the pandemic, because I think working from home, you feel you have this need to sort of show that you've been doing more, because there's not someone there to see that you've actually been doing it. So I think people as a whole are more productive. Like I personally had to get up and get ready as if I was actually going to the office myself. And I think the difficult thing for me is that the lines between work and normal life have now been sort of blurred. The thing, I wouldn't mind working late in the office as long as I knew when I got home that that was it. I was done for the day. I think we're still, so would the create revelations of my practice? Probably not as much. I think I'm still working a similar way to what I was working in the office and sort of myself before, but probably working more now. But at the minute, I'm trying to come to the office a little bit to sort of try and keep that balance and escape the house a bit more. But thank you. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope I've not bored you too much and droned on. If there's anything else I can do to sort of help you out, I'd be more than happy to do so. My email address is cjacksongraphic@outlook.com, and my Instagram's cjacksongraphic. If you want to get in touch, feel free to do so. And good luck in the rest of your studies. Thank you.